before the sun rose over the harbor. A 12-year-old boy stood barefoot on cold steel, staring at a country he had only heard about through shattered walls and hurried whispers. He carried nothing but the dirt on his clothes and the fear in his chest. He wasn't a refugee. He wasn't a visitor. He was a prisoner of war, a child taken across an ocean he never wanted to cross. And on that first morning in America, the very first thing placed in his hands was something he never expected, something so simple, yet so powerful that it nearly broke him. No one around him understood why his breathing stopped, why he froze, why tears formed before he could speak. But he knew. He understood exactly what that moment meant. Stay with me, because what happened next would change the rest of his life. His name was Lucas Richter, just 12 years old. When the sun finally reached the camp that morning, he was already awake, standing in line with the others. Dawn didn't bring warmth. It only showed more of what he wanted to forget. Rows of guards calling out instructions, boots striking the frozen ground, men shuffling forward with blank faces. Lucas clutched a small, torn doll against his chest, the last piece of home he still recognized. It wasn't meant for him. It belonged to his younger sister. He kept it hidden under his coat, pressing it close whenever fear crept up the back of his neck. It was the only thing that reminded him she might still be alive somewhere. He didn't understand most of the English being shouted around him. The words rolled past him like the noise of a passing train, sharp but impossible to grasp. He only knew one thing with certainty. No one in this place saw a child. They saw a prisoner, a number, an enemy. What Lucas wanted was painfully simple: a full meal, a warm place to sleep, and a chance to get back to the family he'd lost during the chaos of his capture. But the road between him and that hope was filled with suspicion. Some guards kept glancing at him longer than the others, whispering among themselves. Other prisoners stared too. A rumor had started days earlier. No one would say where it began, but it reached every corner of the holding barracks. Lucas wasn't just another child pulled from the ruins. He carried something. He knew something. Maybe a message. Maybe a name. And because no one knew the truth, assumptions filled the silence. At 1:20-minute mark, the order finally came. A whistle cut through the air, signaling the next group to move out. Lucas felt a hand on his shoulder as a soldier pushed him toward the transport line. Men and boys were directed into the same column, their breaths rising in thin clouds as they marched toward the waiting train. The closer he got, the tighter the guards formed around him. They didn't speak to him, but their eyes never left him. It wasn't protection. It was caution. He stumbled once on the gravel, catching himself with the hand holding the doll. A guard saw it and stiffened, as if even that small object meant something it shouldn't. As the line moved forward, Lucas felt the tension deepen. Something was expected of him, something he didn't understand. He stepped up into the dark train car, and for a brief second, a sliver of light fell across his coat, revealing the outline of a small shape hidden inside. Whatever he carried, whatever he was accused of, was about to follow him across an ocean he had never imagined crossing. And the moment the train door slid shut behind him, his life began to shift in a direction he couldn't control. When the transport ship finally reached the American coastline, Lucas stood pressed against the rail, trying to understand the world rising in front of him. The shoreline was nothing like the shattered towns he had been taken from. Instead of crumbling walls and broken roofs, there were towering buildings that seemed impossibly clean, cranes moving in smooth arcs, and piers crowded with people who looked as if the war existed somewhere far away from them. The noise was overwhelming. English voices layered over one another, officers shouting instructions, workers yelling across the dock, dockhands unloading crates with practiced speed. Lucas couldn't tell what any of them were saying. All he understood was that every sound made his chest tighten. The prisoners were guided down the ramp in single file. As the cold metal of the gangplank clanged beneath their boots, the American flag above them caught the light. Lucas stared at it, because he didn't know where else to look. The guards around him had sharper uniforms, polished boots, and clipped movements that left no space for hesitation. Every few steps, one of them glanced his way, and he quickly looked down at the ground. At 2:45, the tone shifts. Once they reach the relocation center, the atmosphere changed, not because it grew safer, but because everything felt unfamiliar. The hallways smelled of soap instead of dirt. The floors were smooth instead of cracked. People spoke quickly, their hands moving as they tried to direct the new arrivals. A woman wearing a white nurse's coat approached Lucas with a softness he wasn't expecting. She knelt slightly so she could see his face, then reached into her pocket and brought out a small piece of wrapped candy. She placed it gently in his hand. Lucas froze. He didn't know if it was a test, a mistake, or a kindness he wasn't allowed to accept. When she encouraged him with a smile, he still couldn't move. He didn't know the rule here. In the camps he had passed through, taking something without being told could lead to punishment. When she tried to guide his hand toward his mouth, he pulled back too fast, bumping into another guard. The guard frowned, misunderstanding the moment, and Lucas shrank in on himself. The nurse tried to explain, speaking to the guard with an urgency that didn't reach Lucas, who only heard more English he couldn't follow. The candy stayed in his hand, warm now from his grip, though he still didn't dare eat it. By 4 o'clock, the tension rose again. The prisoners were led to a holding area where they would wait for transportation inland. While they stood inside the fenced corridor, shifting nervously from foot to foot, a man behind Lucas tugged gently on his sleeve. His face was gaunt, eyes hollowed by weeks of fear and sleepless nights. He whispered in German, words that Lucas hadn't heard outside his own thoughts for days. The man held a thin, folded piece of paper, edges wrinkled, writing pressed faintly into the surface. "They'd hide this from me. Only until tonight." The man whispered. His voice trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of whatever was written there. Lucas stared at the paper. He knew the danger of carrying anything that wasn't listed or approved. He had seen men beaten for less. But the man's hand shook so badly that Lucas felt something twist inside him. The request wasn't for strategy. It wasn't for advantage. It was desperation. Slowly, Lucas reached out. His fingers closed around the paper, barely brushing the man's hand. He slipped it beneath his coat, pressing it against his chest where the doll already rested. It took only a few seconds, but that was enough. A guard standing near the gate noticed him adjusting his coat. His eyes lingered on the small shift of fabric, longer than they should have. The guard's expression didn't change, but he took a slow step closer, watching Lucas with a silence that felt far heavier than any shouted order. And just like that, the boy who only wanted to disappear into the crowd became the one figure the guard couldn't look away from. Minutes after stepping off the transport line, the boy is taken by the elbow and separated from the others. No explanation, no translation, just a firm hand and the sound of boots echoing down a narrow hallway. He's guided into a small room, bare walls, a metal table, and a single lamp that throws a sharp circle of light across his trembling hands. The guard closes the door behind him. The latch clicks, and in that moment, the boy feels the room shrink around him. A man sits across from him, uniform pressed, eyes steady. He taps a pen against a stack of papers, not angrily, almost rhythmically, as if waiting for the boy to break the silence first. Questions begin, slow and deliberate, each one spoken in English he cannot understand. Every sentence lands like a weight he cannot carry. He tries to speak, just a few words from home, but they collapse into the air and fade before reaching the man across the table. The ticking of the clock grows louder. The lamp feels hotter. His coat feels heavier because the paper he hid still presses against his ribs. Another question, louder this time. The man gestures toward the boy's coat. The boy stiffens. His breath catches. He lowers his eyes, knowing the wrong move could draw even more attention. Then the door opens. Another prisoner is brought in. A thin boy, younger than him, shaking. The two are placed side by side. The officers step back, whispering among themselves. The thin boy glances at him, then at the coat, then back at the officers. It happens quickly. The younger boy points. Not directly, just a small, hesitant motion. But it's enough. The gesture betrays them both. Moments later, the older prisoner, the one who trusted him with the paper, is dragged from the holding area. He doesn't shout, just looks over his shoulder once, confused, realizing something has gone wrong. The boy watches, frozen where he stands. That single look burns into him. He feels guilt settle in his stomach, heavy and sharp. He wants to explain that he stayed silent to protect him, that he never meant for this to happen. But he knows no one would understand the words, even if he found the strength to speak them. For a brief moment, the boy's mind flashes back. His mother's hands tying a scarf around his neck, his father's voice calling him in from the yard, the warmth of a home he may never see again. The memory is so clear it feels like he's standing there, if only for a heartbeat. And then it slips away. The interrogation continues, but the boy no longer hears the questions. He stands there, shoulders small beneath the oversized coat, overwhelmed by the weight of a mistake he never intended to make, and the realization that, in this place, even the smallest choices carry consequences he is not prepared for. When the trucks return for assignments the next morning, the boy is placed among a smaller group, men and a few youths, each handed a tag with a location he cannot read. A guard gestures for him to climb into the back of a pickup truck, its wooden rails worn smooth from years of use. As it pulls away from the camp, he presses his fingers through the slats and watches the fences shrink behind him, unsure whether he is being taken somewhere safer, or somewhere even more uncertain. The road stretches through open fields, sun breaking over the horizon, bathing everything in a warm light that feels unfamiliar after weeks of confinement. Farmhouses appear in the distance, white paint peeling, laundry drifting on lines, smoke curling from chimneys. The vehicle slows in front of one of them. An older man in overalls waits by the gate, hands hooked in his pockets, expression unreadable. The boy is led toward the house. The wooden steps creak under his weight. The screen door opens to reveal a kitchen that smells of something he hasn't known for a long time: fresh bread. A worn table stands in the center, chairs of different heights gathered around it, suggesting a family that has endured its own hardships. He's shown where to set his small bundle of belongings. The family watches him carefully, not unkindly, but with the hesitation one might show toward a stray animal unsure whether it will bolt or settle. The mother places a plate before him, simple food, warm, generous. He eats slowly at first, unsure if he's expected to finish it or leave some behind. But when she nods once, he allows himself to take a slightly bigger bite. A young boy, close to his own age, enters the room holding a small wooden toy, a car with chipped paint. He sets it on the table in front of the newcomer without saying a word. The gesture is quiet, almost shy. For a moment, the boy feels the faint warmth of belonging, something he hasn't felt since before the war took everything familiar from him. But outside the window, a truck passes. Two neighbors in the back glance toward the farmhouse. One gestures toward the kitchen, scowling, words carried off by the wind but clear in tone. The Americans have taken in someone who, to them, still represents the uniform of the men who fought on the other side. The boy sees the expression on the farmer's face tighten, just slightly, before smoothing back into something calmer. Even here, far from the camps, he senses tension waiting at the edges. Later that evening, as is shown to a small room near the barn, he notices something tucked beneath an old chair, a thin comic book, its cover bright and faded at the same time from years in the sun. He picks it up, flipping carefully through pages he cannot read. On the inside cover, someone has written a name and an address, long ago, in uneven handwriting. The ink is smudged, and he has no way of knowing who it belonged to or why it was left behind. But the moment he sees it, something stirs in him. A question, a direction, a possibility that this old book carries a story he was never meant to find, and he keeps it close, uncertain why, yet unable to let it go. Later that night, when the house has settled into quiet and the only sound is the wind brushing against the barn walls, the boy pulls the old comic book back onto his lap. He traces the letters written inside the cover, slowly sounding them out the way he remembers from school before the war scattered his lessons. One phrase catches his attention. It's short, but familiar enough that he can piece it together. And when he realizes it is a person's name, one he has heard whispered among prisoners during transport, something shifts in his chest. He reads the note again and again, until the meaning becomes clear. The scribbled address was not left by a child. It was left by someone who needed it found. Someone connected to matters the boy does not understand, yet cannot ignore. The next morning, a guard from the work detail arrives with a bundle of clothes and a small folder. The moment the boy sees the folded paper inside, a paper he thought he had hidden well during his first days in captivity, his heart pounds. The guard unfolds it slowly. It isn't just a letter. It contains a set of numbers written in tight rows, and beneath them, a family name he has never heard before. To the Americans, these are not harmless scribbles. They look like directions, positions, information someone might pass from one camp to another. And now the officers watch the boy with a steady focus that makes every breath feel heavy. They speak quietly outside the farmhouse, glancing toward him through the window as if evaluating a threat far larger than the frightened child. By noon, a government vehicle stops at the edge of the property. 2 men step out, carrying folders thicker than the boy's arm. They enter the house without raising their voices, but their presence fills every corner of the room. The farmer's wife stands stiffly by the stove, hands clasped together. The farmer keeps touching his hat, unsure whether to sit or stand. The boy listens from the doorway as the officers ask about his behavior, every detail, who he speaks to, what he carries, what whispers he might have heard in the camp. The family answers carefully, but the unease is clear. Their kindness toward him now places them under suspicion. In the middle of the questioning, one of the officers pulls out a photograph. It's the nurse from the relocation center, the one who gave the boy candy and spoke gently, even when he couldn't understand her words. They reveal she was no ordinary nurse. She had been present during interrogations at multiple processing sites. She had watched the boy from the moment he arrived on American soil. She was listening for clues, waiting to see if he might reveal something he didn't even know he carried. This revelation burns through him. The comfort he thought he found on that first day now feels uncertain. Every small kindness, every soft gesture, was it genuine? Or was it meant to uncover a secret he never asked to be part of? The officers turn their attention toward the boy. Their questions come slowly, each one measured, each one pushing him into a corner he cannot escape. They explain that the family who took him in could face consequences if the information he carried was part of a larger plan. They need clarity. They need him to speak. They need him to decide whether he will tell them everything. Names, objects, letters, places, or remain silent. Now he understands the weight of what is unfolding. If he reveals the truth about the paper, the coordinates, and the friend who begged him to hide it, he might clear the family who has given him warmth for the first time in months. But telling them could mark him as unreliable, or worse, send him to a harsher facility far from anyone who has shown him humanity. If he stays silent, the family could bear the blame for something they never knew existed. Their trust in him, fragile as it already is, might shatter. He stands at the center of the kitchen, trembling, unable to meet the farmer's eyes. The officers wait for his answer. The room seems to hold its breath. And just as one of the officers reminds him that time is running out, the boy understands that whatever he chooses next would determine the fate of everyone in that house. A choice he never asked for. A choice he cannot avoid. At 14 minutes, the story pauses on that decision, and what he does next will change everything. Even as questions hung over the farmhouse like an unspoken weight, the boy found small moments of quiet that seemed almost impossible. At night, when the stars glimmered above the fields, the farmer's youngest child would bring him a cup of warm milk, leaning close to whisper a single English word, repeating it until the boy could say it back without stumbling. Each syllable felt like a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting him to a world that was at once strange and welcoming. He began to notice the subtle rhythms of the house, the soft creak of the floorboards at dawn, the way the mother's hands folded clothes, the careful way the father checked the locks on the barn. These ordinary emotions, ordinary kindnesses, carried an extraordinary weight for someone who had known little safety for months. And for a moment, the boy allowed himself to hope that perhaps he could belong here, that perhaps the world could be steady enough to trust. But the world outside had not forgotten him. By mid-afternoon, a copy of the local newspaper made its way to the farmhouse porch. He had learned to recognize a few English words by now, and he saw them in bold print. Accusations, questions, warnings. The headlines suggested children like him might be carrying secrets, saboteurs in the fields, spies hidden behind innocent faces. Neighbors gathered along the road, murmuring in hushed tones. Some watched from wagons, some from fences, whispering about the strangers who had come into their midst. The tension pressed in through the windows, through the walls, until even the quietest corners of the house seemed aware that every visitor, every glance, could carry judgment. And then the offer came. A man from town, well known for his wealth and influence, approached the host father. He spoke softly at first, then louder, outlining a proposition. Hand the boy over. Money, land, resources, anything the farmer might desire. It was a test of principle, a challenge of conscience, and a chance to turn a profit from fear. The father looked at the boy, then at the family gathered in the kitchen. His voice was steady when he refused. There would be no exchange. There would be no betrayal from him. The warmth of the house, the bond they had begun to forge, mattered more than anything offered in greed or convenience. But trust is delicate, and even in a place that seemed safe, someone had already made a different choice. A neighbor, close enough to visit often, had watched and listened. Quiet gestures, casual remarks, words half-heard. They added up until a single decision was made. The neighbor carried news, quietly, to authorities in town. A whisper here, a report there, a betrayal that no one could have expected. The boy would not know immediately who had done it, nor why, but he would feel the weight of it almost instantly, in the subtle shifts in tone, the pointed glances, the tightening of hands around coffee cup, the silence of someone who once spoke freely. And in that moment, as the sun dipped low across the farmland, the question pressed itself forward like a shadow. Who betrayed them, and why? The boy had begun to understand that even in a place he thought was safe, danger could arrive quietly, in the form of a familiar face. That evening, the neighbor who had delivered the warning to authorities stepped into the fading light of the farmhouse yard. Hands clenched at his sides, eyes downcast, his posture rigid as the autumn wind brushed against the fields. He was a widower, a man who had lost a son to the war months before. The boy had heard whispers of grief, fragments of conversations meant to be private, words he could only partially understand. Now he listened. The neighbor spoke softly, almost to himself, recounting memories of a life hollowed by loss, of a child torn from him by forces he could not control, and of the bitterness that had settled deep in his chest. This was not about duty, patriotism, or suspicion. This was revenge. Pain had been folded into a sharp edge, and the neighbor had directed it toward the boy, a child with no part in his grief. The boy remained hidden, pressed against the corner of the barn, watching the confession unfold. His own heart tightened as he realized the truth. Hatred was not only imposed by uniform, language, or country. Hatred was carried in the quiet, in the unspoken choices people made, and it could reach far beyond labels like enemy or friend. He heard the neighbor's voice crack, heard the grief and anger laid bare in a way the boy had never known could exist. A shiver ran through him, not from cold, but from the weight of understanding. And in that instant, something shifted inside him. Shame for the letter he had carried, the suspicion that had fallen on his host family, the helplessness he had felt when others had suffered because of him. All of it collided with a new determination. He would no longer allow himself to be defined by fear, by others' hatred, or by the war that had taken so much from him. The fading autumn light traced the contours of the neighbor's face, the neighbor's hand still clenched, and the boy pressed against the barn wall, his chest rising and falling with quiet resolve. He understood, then, that proving his humanity would require courage, subtlety, and choices far harder than anything he had faced so far. And yet, despite the danger, he was ready to act. The morning air was heavy with tension long before anyone spoke. The boy knew something was coming. From the edge of the fields, the sound of boots crunching gravel grew louder, deliberate, unhurried but impossible to ignore. Officials had arrived, carrying papers, instructions, and the authority to detain any child who might be considered a threat. Inside the farmhouse, the family moved quietly, almost in sync, preparing for what they feared might come. The father adjusted a chair. The mother folded sheets in slow, precise motions, and the youngest child glanced repeatedly at the boy, offering a small, reassuring smile that carried more courage than words could hold. The boy felt the weight of the decision he had been building toward for weeks. He could hide, slip beneath the floorboards or behind crates in the barn, stay silent, and hope the family's preparations would be enough. Or he could step forward, confront the officers, and speak. Outside, the search party began moving methodically across the property. Voices echoed in the crisp morning air, muffled shouts blending with the wind. The boy pressed himself against the cool wooden floor, toes tucked beneath him, heart hammering as he listened to the sounds of hands lifting boards and feet shifting over hay. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every creak of the floor above magnified, each one a reminder of the risk. Time stretched as the search continued, measured in the boy's shallow breaths. Seconds became minutes. The reality of exposure, of authority poised to judge him, pressed against him from every angle. And yet, in that tight space beneath the floorboards, a new clarity emerged. The kindness he had received from the family, the small gestures of milk, words, and care, they had carried a weight far greater than fear. At 21 minutes, the boy made his choice. He shifted, rose from the floor, and stepped into the sunlight, pouring through the doorway. His small hand reached for the sleeve of the lead officer, the uniform cold and rigid beneath his fingers. He spoke, voice shaking, but clear enough to carry over the hush of the yard. He explained, as best he could, what the paper had meant, the truth of the notes, and the innocence of the family who had sheltered him. The lead officer hesitated, studying the boy, weighing the risk, reading the fear in his eyes. Behind him, the family's youngest child stepped forward, small and unwavering, describing in careful words the boy's quiet acts of kindness, helping with chores, sharing food, learning quickly, always patient, always careful. The testimony hung in the air, bending the tension, drawing the gaze of every official toward the fragile humanity in the scene. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The officers exchanged glances. The boy's hand remained lightly on the sleeve, a tether between danger and trust, his chest rising and falling with measured courage. And then the world seemed to pause. They did not immediately remove him, but no one could claim certainty about the next decision. Every breath, every shadow, every slight movement mattered. The boy had chosen truth over safety. He had risked everything to protect the family that had given him a chance at life. And now, the outcome waited, balanced delicately between hope and consequence. Their decision would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. The day after the confrontation, the farmhouse felt different. The air held a quiet tension, but it was mixed with a fragile sense of relief. The authorities had made a decision, not final, not permanent, but enough to allow life to continue. The boy would remain under supervised care. He would attend classes to learn English, and the paperwork that might otherwise have sent him far from this home was set in motion to protect both him and the family who had sheltered him. It was a compromise, a thin line between safety and uncertainty, but it was a line he could finally stand upon. He noticed it first in the small gestures. The mother handing him breakfast without hesitation, the father nodding in encouragement as he carried water to the fields, the youngest child sliding a repaired toy across the table. The world outside had not vanished, but a corner of it was beginning to feel like his own. Months passed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to adapt. English words formed in his mouth with increasing confidence, letters traced across pages with growing steadiness. He worked in the fields alongside the family, learning the rhythm of planting and harvesting, of soil under nails and sun on skin. He went to a small schoolhouse nearby, the chalkboard a strange but welcoming canvas for new knowledge. Boots were mended, hair washed, clothes repaired. A smile returned, tentative at first, then fuller as time stitched together fragments of childhood that war had torn apart. In quiet moments, he wrote letters to a sibling lost to distance and uncertainty. Words carried the hope he could not yet speak aloud, sent across an ocean to remind himself that someone, somewhere, still mattered. The boy had not forgotten the pain, the betrayals, or the fear. The former snitch eventually returned, eyes lowered, shame pressing against the lines of his face. The boy forgave him, understanding the weight of choices made in terror and desperation. But forgiveness did not erase the memory. It did not remove the scars. It only allowed them to exist alongside acts of courage and human connection. Other relationships remained uncertain. The neighbor who had betrayed them lingered in the distance, a figure marked by grief that had yet to soften. The officials, once rigid and unyielding, adapted slowly to the truth of the boy's situation, yet the shadow of suspicion never entirely left the corners of their offices. Life carried on, a mixture of resolution and lingering questions. One evening, the boy walked alone to the waterfront. The water reflected the gold of the setting sun. Across the waves, the ship that had first brought him to this country rested silently at the dock. He ran his hand over the mended doll he still carried, the same doll that had pressed against his chest in the camp, now repaired but worn with memory. He realized then that his life had changed irrevocably. He had a home, a family, and a place to grow. Yet beneath the surface of each smile, each step forward, the memory of that first day, the fear, the confusion, the distance remained. It haunted him quietly, a reminder of what he had endured, of what he had survived, and of what it meant to be human in a world still scarred by war. And as he watched the sun sink below the horizon, he understood that life could be both beautiful and heavy, that courage often came wrapped in fear, and that the smallest acts of kindness could hold more power than armies ever could. He had come to America by force, a boy labeled guilty by birth, a child whose only crime was being born on the other side of a war he could not understand. By the time he turned 15, he had learned 3 things. That language can build bridges between people who once seemed impossible to reach, that kindness can endure, even when suspicion shadows every gesture, and that secrets, small, heavy, or hidden, can carry a lifetime of weight, shaping choices long after fear has passed. Now he walks down a quiet lane, the sun low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields he has come to know. His shoulders are steadier, his steps measured, carrying both memory and hope in equal measure. The doll he once clutched so tightly is now mended, worn smooth by time, a symbol of resilience and the life he has fought to claim. If you were him, would you have risked everything to protect the family that showed you care, or remained silent to survive another day? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more untold WW2 stories like this, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Watch next. The Night the Village Hit a Soldier. Link on screen now. End with a soft musical swell, lingering on the boy walking down the lane, smaller now, but carrying a quiet strength, the sunlight stretching across fields he can finally call home.